Now, I have to tell you that I was once a naive dreamer raised on the Beatles' Give Peace a Chance, to live in peace and harmony. Then I got mugged into reality that caused me to go in search of answers. Not really understanding the history and the background of where I was in Israel, where I was a Jew. Like most of the Israelis, we're of your mindset, just to be nice people, they'll be nice back to us.
We're lust for a whole life, and nothing but less makes people jump out of a comfortable pond into an unknown ocean. Welcome to that journey between the East and the West. Who says Rolling Stones don't gather moss? Hello everyone, I am Meenu Gupta, your host for the day, and I'm delighted to have you join me every week as amazing people share their incredible and inspiring life stories of straddling continents. Thank you. Welcome back to Between the East and the West, a space where we listen, question, and try to understand the world not in black and white, but in nuance, context, and complexity. Our mission here is not to take sides, but to open up dialogue across divides, especially when it's difficult. Today's guest is Barry Shaw, Senior Associate for Public Diplomacy at the Israel Institute for Strategic Studies. He's also a writer, commentator, and the host of The View from Israel. Barry has written extensively about Israeli security, media narratives, and geopolitics, and brings with him a strong point of view. Now, let me be clear when we start. This podcast is not pro-Israel, pro-Palestine, or pro-any side. We are pro-dialogue, pro-understanding, and above all, pro-peace. This episode is part of our ongoing effort to hear a broad spectrum of voices, including those we may agree with or not agree with. As always, we encourage our listeners to stay curious, to listen with open ears and critical minds, and to remember that peace building starts with conversation. Barry, welcome to the show. Thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you, Meenu, for having me.
And you host a show called The View from Israel. So what do you think are some of the most misunderstood aspects of Israel's position in international discourse today?
Yeah, I have to say at the beginning that to you, Meena, I'm with a mea culpa, if you like, that I admit I'm not philosophy driven. I'm driven by reality, a reality that's born from, I would say, generations of Jewish suffering and my own personal experiences as one of those, both in Europe, in Britain, and in Israel. And this is what shaped my outlook of life and my responses to my enemies that have defined who I am today, which is totally wrong. And it's been sharpened by knowing my roots and fully understanding the intentions of my enemies. And I have to admit that I came to this from a completely different perspective. And I don't know whether you want me at this time to go into some detail of my personal journey, which will possibly put into perspective where I come from, where my argument is based, particularly when it comes to strategic affairs.
The region, when I say the region, I mean the entire region, which has seen enormous pain and loss in Gaza, is in Israel and across the wider region when I'm talking. How do you process or reconcile the emotional weight of this tragedy, which is actually ongoing? And there's a lot of tragedy, if we put a label of one country or another, the point is the following: it's a human tragedy. It's human lives being, how would I say this, innocent lives on both sides, I would say. So how does one reconcile with that is a question.
I'll approach this in slightly a different way, but I'm certainly going to answer what you asked in full, right? So if I talk about my experience, I was born in England, and I experienced there what drove me into examining who I was and where I wanted to be. I'm coming up my personal story, and you'll see how this links in with a wider global thing. Growing up, I experienced anti-Semitism in my school, and in my working life, I experienced anti-Semitism in a non-Jewish environment where one person told me in crude terms to, in English, bugger off and go to Palestine where I belong. So I did. I had other reasons that brought me to Israel. But when I come to Israel, I'm now told by much in the world and the leftist world, get out of Israel, you don't belong there. So where is a Jew to be? There's a philosophy here that the Arabs wanted another land, even though they had received plenty of lands through the international treaties, and the same treaties that gave birth, legitimate birth, to the state of Israel. This came about through international treaties and decisions. This was post-World War I and the collapse of the Ottoman Empire that created Jordan, created Syria, created Lebanon, created Iraq, even created Saudi Arabia, add Egypt into the mix. And there seems to be a lot of Arab states to keep everybody happy. But that didn't cut it. They didn't go to war against us to create a place called Palestine. There was no such Arab ambition at that time. They wanted to carve us out for themselves. There was plenty of geographic evidence of this truth. Syria sees the Golan Heights. Egypt sees Sinai in Gaza in war. Jordan sees the land of the west bank of the River Jordan up to and including the old city of Jerusalem in 1947-48. Basically at the same time as we were creating and establishing our state of Israel, which had been approved by international treaties and endorsed by the United Nations. And yet, Jordan swept all the way along the West Bank, all the way up into Jerusalem. And you know what they did there? They evicted all the Jews in the old city of Jerusalem, which at that time had a Jewish majority. And their homes and their businesses were taken over by the Arabs that followed the Jordanian army. But instead of stopping there, they went to war against us again in 1967 when combined Arab armies failed again to wipe us off the map. We gained control of significant territory, recontrol, I would say, including the Sinai Peninsula and the Gaza Strip that's been taken by Egypt, the West Bank and East Jerusalem, all the way driving the Jordanians all the way back over the River Jordan, that had been Jordan since 47 to 60, and the Golan Heights that had been taken by Syria. And on the 1st of September 1967, after they had lost again, to stop trying to sweep us off the map of the Middle East, their response for losing that war came with the infamous Arab rejection of Israel's existence with their three no's resolution in Khartoum, where the Arab nations met and decided no peace, no negotiations, and no recognition of Israel. This is after 3 wars against us. This was followed by the Yom Kippur War, known as the 1973 Arab-Israel War. They picked the most holy Jewish day to launch war of annihilation against us. They called it the Ramadan War, fought on between the 6th and the 25th of October, 1973, which they again lost. And after this war, both Egypt and Jordan made peace agreements with Israel. But they developed guerrilla warfare tactics against Israel, using and arming and training Palestinian Arabs as their military proxies. Now, I have to tell you that I was once a naive dreamer raised on the Beatles' Give Peace a Chance. to live in peace and harmony. Then I got mugged into reality that caused me to go in search of answers. Not really understanding the history and the background of where I was in Israel, where I was a Jew. Like most of the Israelis were of your mindset, just to be nice people, they'll be nice back to us. Yeah, we went to the Oslo Peace Accords with Yasser Arafat, Yitzhak Rabin, and Shimon Peres. And we decided to cede territory that had been our historic possession for 3,000 years. And we gave out that for the Palestinians to give peace a chance. So where did this thing go wrong? Well, let me say we went wrong with, for instance, our so-called peace partner, Yasser Arafat. Signed the Oslo Peace Accords on the White House lawn with an uncertain Yitzhak Rabin. He had his doubts about Arafat, and a peacemaker, Shimon Peres. And this was witnessed by the President Bill Clinton and guaranteed by the world leaders from Europe, Russia, and Japan. What could be better than that? Peace in our time. That goes this sort of Neville Chamberlain, who had taken a trip to Berlin and met with Adolf Hitler and signed a document pledging non-aggression, deceptive piece of paper. Arafat promised us peace of the brave. Meena, he actually delivered us peace of the grave. Arafat killed more Jews, more Israelis after he received the Nobel Peace Prize than he killed before. We allowed Arafat back from exile in Tunis. Why was he doing in Tunis? Because he'd been waging war against us, and then he turned against King Hussein in Jordan. And the Jordanian army went to war against Arafat's PLO, Fatah terrorists, and drove them out. And they went to Lebanon for safety. And from Lebanon, he carried on his terror attacks against Israel, killing children, killing women in the north of Israel. And so we went to war, and I was in the IDF at that time in order to drive Arafat and the PLO out of Lebanon. And we succeeded in doing. He went into exile in Tunis, and from Tunis, he continued his campaign of terror against us. You may remember, for instance, the notorious Munich Olympic Games massacre, where he and Mahmoud Abbas planned to send their killers into the Olympic Stadium and kill the Israeli Olympic team. This is what Yasser Arafat did. Now, people might say, well, he's doing it in order to preserve Palestine. Let me take you back a bit. Let's go back to 1920, to a man called Haj Amin al-Husseini in the 1920s, where again, Jerusalem at that time, this is shortly after the First World War, the Jerusalem at that time still had a Jewish majority in the old city. And yet Haj Amin al-Husseini whipped up the Arab crowd, used a festive Nabi Musa festival, which was one with music and dancing and everything, and turned it into a pogrom against the Jews in the old city of Jerusalem, where they killed and maimed the people in Jerusalem. And his anti-Israel, anti-Semitic, this was prior to Israel, by the way, his anti-Semitic tactics took him to Jaffa, where again, the Arabs rose up and killed the Jews, to Hebron, where they rose up and killed the Jews. And the British who were there at this time after the First World War went to try and arrest him. So Haj Amin al-Husseini left Jerusalem. Where did he go to? He went to Iraq. And he counted himself in the Islamic Council in Iraq. Iraq at that time was part of the end of World War I. Coming up was German, had been German occupied, but was taken by the British. And even there, Haj Amin al-Husseini decided to whip up a pogrom in Iraq, in Baghdad, called the Fahud, against the Jews of Baghdad. What has that got to do with Palestine? Nothing at all. It's steeped simply in anti-Semitism. And when the British came to arrest him for the murder of Jews in Baghdad, he fled Iraq. Where did he go to next, Meena? Do you know this? He went via Italy to Berlin, where he met Adolf Hitler. And he arranged and planned with Adolf Hitler and Adolf Eichmann and others the final solution of the Jewish problem in the Middle East. And the plan is, when Nazi Germany had marched across Africa into Egypt and into pre-state, still Palestine at that time, he was going to have Haji Meenu Husseini unfurl the next Holocaust of the Jews in the Middle East. But he had to leave because the Allies were approaching Berlin. So Haji Meenu Husseini fled again. Where did he go to? He went to Egypt, where he was adopted as a hero by the Islamists in Egypt, the Muslim Brotherhood, etc. And he mentored a young Egyptian man, like just out of teenage, at 20-something years old, how to deal with the Jews. And this young man changed his name and changed his identity. You know who this young man was? This Egyptian? Yasser Arafat suddenly emerged in the region, not as an Egyptian, but Yasser Arafat, the leader of the Palestinian guerrilla movement against the possibility of a Jewish state. So even Yasser Arafat was being deceptive about his own identity. Now, let me, again, talk about something here. When his terrorists came for us at my seaside town here of Netanya, I'm sitting here, I'm 5 minutes from the beach. And if I look out of the window, I can see what you call the West Bank. So it's not the river to the sea. It's from my perspective, personal perspective here in Netanya, 5 minutes walk to the beach, the Mediterranean. It's from the 6th Road to the sea. Because the other side of the 6th Road, which is the main Israeli highway, I don't know if you've been to Israel at all, Meenu. If not, you should come here and view the close proximity that we're talking about here. Just across, there's now a wall breaching what's called Tul Karam from the 6th Road. Tul Karam is where Yasser Arafat sent out not one, not two, but 8 separate suicide bombers into my little town here of Netanya. He sent 2 separate suicide bombers to the entrance of a shopping mall. One of them almost killed my wife. He killed one sent one to the marketplace, where he killed somebody who worked for me. He sent a suicide bomber to the Park Hotel significantly on Passover. Passover is the festival where Jews celebrate our freedom from slavery in Egypt. And yet Yasser Arafat sent a suicide bomber into the Park Hotel, which is on the seafront here in Netanya, killing 36 Israelis, men and women, injuring 114. And I began to ask questions. What is going on? What is this thing that I decided to give peace a chance? Is this the result of what I was doing? And I went looking for answers. And one expert in Islam, in Arabic, Professor Mordechai Kedar, told me, you shouldn't listen to what Yasser Arafat tells you or the BBC in English. It's more important to understand what he's telling his own people in Arabic. And it was true. When we allowed him back from exile, from Tunis, he made a couple of visits to mosques, one in Egypt and one in Johannesburg, South Africa. And he told the critical congregation there, why did you make peace with the Jews? And he said to them, ignore it. This piece of paper that I signed is nothing better than the Treaty of Hudaybiyah. You know what the Treaty of Hudaybiyah is, Meenu? The Treaty of Hudaybiyah was the agreement that Muhammad made with the tribes of Quraysh. Part of that was Jewish. They controlled Mecca and Medina. And when he came to try and take Mecca and Medina, they had an army and they fought him off. And so Muhammad made a 10-year pact with them that he would not attack them at least for 10 years and give peace a chance. And so the people of Quraysh, who were really traders and merchants, went back to their business and said, okay, we've made peace with Muhammad and his horde is not going to come and attack us, so we'll concentrate on peaceful trade around the Middle East. They dropped their defenses. What happened 6 years later? Muhammad emerged out of the desert with a renewed army and slaughtered them all and took Mecca, in which he celebrated with a ceremony of beheading 800 young men and boys, Jewish men and boys, and taking one teenage girl to be his concubine. So what Arafat was telling the people in the mosques in Egypt and Johannesburg, don't be worried about this. I'm being deceptive. This is nothing but the Treaty of Hudaybiyah. I can tell you that the world was so impressed with Yasser Arafat signing an agreement on the White House lawn that they awarded him the Nobel Peace Prize. Meenu, one of my purposes of being on your show tonight is to explain to you and to your followers that Yasser Arafat killed more Jews after he received the Nobel Peace Prize than he had killed before.
Thank you for sharing that, Barry. That's also part of a narrative. Some critics argue that public diplomacy at times becomes a form of narrative warfare instead of fostering understanding. So how would you respond to that? And because the role of truth in this time of propaganda polarization is also a question. Is there, let's say, there is a past, there's a present, and there's a future, and there is a sea of humanity. Having said that, letting the past rule the future is in bloodshed. So it's like they say in the Bible, letting the sins of the fathers are visited upon the sons, something to that effect. Having said that, narratives have been used since times immemorial, and particularly even more strongly now, unfortunately, because of social media bringing out narratives which will increase polarization and which have often led to more bloodshed. What is your view on that?
Yes, there are lots of what you said, and I certainly want to answer that. But before I come to that, I would like to end this conversation with you on a positive note. So I'll leave that till later, if I may. But yes, there is you call it a war of dialogue. So you may have something to do with that. And I'm responsible for this because I have been horrified since the 7th of October and what happened by seeing the way that the Western media has gone. I absolutely never expected them to take this approach. I expected that from the radical elements. But I have been involved in this. I've been involved in answering the lies that have been going on from a lot of the so-called respectable Western media. On a personal level, on a professional level, it's taken quite a bit of time of what I've done for the Israel Institute of Strategic Studies to answer some of the lies, because there is something going on. And the way that Israel has been represented since the 7th of October has been absolutely shocking and deplorable. You have to remember that what Israel has faced since that horrible day, where we experienced a genocidal attack by barbarians who attacked the kibbutzim and killed parents tied to their children, who set people on fire, who killed grandparents, who took girls and children and parents into Gaza as hostages, who tortured other people, who went to a dance festival and raped and murdered girls and threw hand grenades into shelters in order to kill them. It was a horror Israel and Jews have never seen since the Holocaust. And this was also parried by what we had up north from Hezbollah in Lebanon, also firing rockets into Israel. And I was watching what's happening, how this was being received around the world. On the 8th of October, I was horrified to see, of all places, in Australia, that the socialist mayor of Sydney had allowed thousands of people to celebrate outside Sydney Opera House the massacre of 1,700 of Israelis by Palestinian Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad. They were shouting and cheering and shouting, Allah Akbar, God is great, death to the Jews, gas to the Jews. And when the mayor, the socialist mayor of Sydney said, why did you allow that to happen? She said, we allow free speech in Australia. You know what's happened in Australia since then? They have torched synagogues in Melbourne and Sydney. They have burnt a Jewish childcare centre in Sydney. They have given death threats to the Jewish leaders of the Australian Jewish Federation. This is happening in Australia, for heaven's sake. When people were putting up signs of the girls, of the children, like the Beavis children, on notice boards in London, in European capitals, in New York, you had students and other people ripping them off. Can you imagine, if you remember what the Beavis babies looked like? Do you remember them? Or have you forgotten about them? We appeal to the world to speak up for our hostages, and it's backed by information and facts which you can find on my social media. But we're competing with so-called the official media. Believe me, if they get the official media, I'm getting feedback, why you kill all these Palestinians? And we're like speechless.
So my question, when I consider, because it is a war of narrative, it is like what you are saying is factual in terms of A, B, and C, different narratives are coming out. My question then is, in this war of narratives, in the present scenario, what does peace look like to you?
We're coming up to the peace.
Yes.
Okay. I have to tell you two things. First, negative. I wrote a book called Fighting Hamas, BDS, and Antisemitism. I didn't write this after the 7th of October. I wrote this about 10 years before, where I predicted what was going to happen with Hamas in charge of Gaza, and also Hamas being the majority in what you call the West Bank. How can you deny the truth of this book when you saw what happened both from the 7th of October, the taking of the hostages, and everything that Hamas has done since? Who is holding Gazans captive? Israel or Hamas? Now, you would have to accept the fact that there are in Gaza refugee camps. I guess you've heard that. Poor Gazans living in refugee camps. Let me ask you a question, a simple question. This is not a narrative. Are the people in Gaza actually Gazan people prepared to be there representing Palestinians or whoever? Or are they refugees? If they're refugees, why weren't they allowed to leave Gaza for safety, as Israel had recommended? As even President Trump, when he came to office, recommended. All the Europeans objected. How dare you move all these people out of Gaza? Give me a war anywhere in which the people, the West, the European countries said, no, you may be in a war led by a dictatorship, but you have to stay and suffer. Why did this change in Gaza? When we were saying, let's move them to safety, okay, and then come back afterwards. No, we're not allowed to do this. This is ethnic cleansing. Really? What happened to the million or so Syrians that fled Assad, for instance, where he was barrel bombing his own people? Did the West there say, no, Europe, whether from Germany or Britain, no, you have to stay there? Didn't. So why different rules apply to what goes on in Gaza when we were saying, let us move the people to safety? The other thing I would add cynically is you're saying they're refugees. So the refugees, let them leave to go to a place where they're not refugees. Or maybe they aren't refugees. So the whole thesis of refugee camps and refugees in Gaza is another pack of lies. So we wanted to move them to safety, and we were committing a war crime, ethnic cleansing, if we did that. We wanted to move them away from a war zone in which they're being controlled by Hamas. Hamas, who built over 300 kilometers, we're now up to about 400, 450, we're finding kilometers, underground tunnels. You know, whenever people bombed us, like Hamas, or Hezbollah, or the Houthis, or Iran, we in Israel have bomb shelters. We even have one in my home over here. The people of Gaza don't have that. So why didn't Hamas, who's supposed to be protecting their people, allow them down into their underground shelters? Why did they keep them above ground where they knew they were being attacked by Israel? Isn't that a war crime? I'm saying this out of common sense. I'm not saying this for any sort of political gain. I'm saying it on behalf of the people in Gaza.
Now, I totally understand.
And yet they don't do this.
They are very valid questions. So therefore, in this exact scenario which you are, my question is going forward from what is there staring at us in the present, what would inclusive peace look like?
Okay, I came up with this solution. That after this war, it should not be fully occupied by Israel. Let's first off with that, right? It shouldn't be occupied neither with the Hamas. It shouldn't be either controlled by the Palestinian Authority because they have proven themselves to be corrupt in Ramallah. And my solution is this, that the future of Gaza should be an Abraham Accords protectorate. And my theory is built on a history, a successful history of protectorates. I don't know if you know this, but America have numerous protectorates. You know, Puerto Rico is an American protectorate. The French have protectorates around the place. British have protectorates. The Falkland Islands, for instance, was one perfect example that were invaded by Argentina. And Margaret Thatcher, the Prime Minister, sent the Air Force and the Navy in order to protect the people of the Falkland Islands. A protectorate happened actually towards the end of the Second World War, when the Allies was removing Nazi Germany. There was a Marshall Plan in West Berlin and West Germany, in which the Allies created a protectorate for West Germany to rebuild a destroyed West Germany. And this protectorate also came with a denazification program, because the Allies were clever enough to say that it would be useless for us to rebuild Germany if there were still the seeds of Nazism within Germany. So they had to denazify Germany. And the outcome of that is the Germany that you well know, a successful, prosperous, democratic, liberal state in Europe. The Americans did it in Japan. Trump calls a new Riviera of the Middle East, if you like, could become a standalone state. In other words, if it succeeds, this could be presented to the United Nations as the independent state of Gaza, a new model for a new Middle East. And let this state of Gaza be introduced into the United Nations and presented there by the Abraham Accords protectorates that had helped build and protected and re-educated it so it would not become a radical thorn in the side of the Middle East and the West.
So this would be about moving forward to peace. Now, if you had to choose one value, not a policy, but a human value, to guide public diplomacy moving forward, what would that be? Because we are living in an era where across the world, as you see, there's a degradation there. So I have come back to the basics and the roots where it all starts.
I would use the word reality. It's something I use quite often.
A human value.
I think reality is a human value.
Okay.
I think reality is facing what you may differ. Facts on the ground, you might call it truth, but facts on the ground, and whether this is good and positive for mankind, for the region, for the people, the actors in the region, reality. Don't be deceived in saying that Yasser Arafat is a peacemaker when the reality told you he's not. Because if you come from, I mentioned at the beginning of our conversation, Meenu, and I probably end on this as well, that I'm not a philosopher, I'm a realist, and I've been mugged into reality. And when I'm coming up against somebody who says he's going to be my neighbor, I want to know whether he's going to be my neighbor or whether he's going to break into my house and murder me or my wife. In other words, let's go into things with an open-eyed reality and trust in the people based on your reality of what they actually mean. This is why, for instance, Hamas can never control Gaza. I'm talking to you out of reality. And this is the way I think we can achieve peace.
Perfect. Thank you for sharing your viewpoints, Barry, and your time with us, as well as your perspectives. And wish you a pleasant day, and we look forward to something where the world, including that part of the world we just spoke of, can move forward instead of getting stuck. Because if the children of the fathers carry on wars because of what is committed before, it will never end. The world will constantly be at war. Having said that, it would be wonderful to say, okay, this is where we all want to move forward. You, me, I, everybody.
Thank you for having me, Meenu. It's very nice to talk with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to the series Between the East and the West. Do subscribe to the channels mentioned on the site in case, of course, you liked what you heard. I am Meenu Gupta, the host of the series, and I'll be looking forward to your comments. We love feedback. Thank you once again. Namaste and bye-bye.